Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly at the bustling nurses' station of Metropolitan Memorial Hospital, her sensible flats and simple navy cardigan a stark contrast to the crisp white coats and designer scrubs swirling around her. For 15 minutes, she'd been trying to get someone's attention, offering polite excuse-me's that evaporated in the clinical air. Nurses rushed past, doctors barked their orders into phones, and administrators clicked by in expensive heels, all seemingly trained to look through rather than at her. When she finally managed to touch the sleeve of the head nurse, woman with immaculately styled hair, the response was a dismissive glance and curt instructions. Take a seat like everyone else, honey. We're an important people are waiting. No one noticed Sarah's subtle smile, as her fingers instinctively touched the worn leather briefcase containing her Harvard Medical School diploma, and the official letter appointing her as Metropolitan's new chief of surgery, the first woman and person of color to hold the position in the hospital's history. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had built her reputation not in the marble halls of prestigious medical centers, but in community hospitals where resources were scarce and innovation essential. The daughter of a nurse and a high school science teacher, she'd worked her way through medical school with scholarships and night shifts, graduating at the top of her class before turning down lucrative offers to serve populations that needed her most. She drove the same reliable Honda she'd purchased 15 years ago, lived in a modest home filled with books rather than status symbols, and invested her considerable salary in a foundation providing medical education scholarships for disadvantaged students. Her colleagues often joked that she was the only surgeon who shopped at department stores during their annual sales. Sarah's appointment to Metropolitan Memorial had raised eyebrows in medical circles. The hospital boasted technology and attracted wealthy patients from around the world, but its patient satisfaction scores had been plummeting for years. Infection rates were rising, staff turnover had reached alarming levels, and whispers of a toxic culture had begun reaching the board of directors. They needed transformation, and Sarah's reputation for turning troubled hospitals into healing environments had made her their top choice. Her unorthodox approach, arriving unannounced in civilian clothes to observe the hospital's true operations, had helped her succeed at 3 previous institutions. "Show me how you treat your most invisible patients," she often said, "and I'll show you the heart of your hospital." Today, the heart she was observing at Metropolitan seemed troublingly arrhythmic. She watched an elderly man's call button flash for 7 minutes before anyone responded. She noticed how quickly staff attended to the expensively dressed woman who snapped her fingers, while their family in the corner waited patiently without updates. The gleaming marble lobby with its donor wall and abstract sculptures presented one face of Metropolitan, but the fraying human connections behind the automated doors told a different story entirely. Sarah moved methodically through the hospital's departments, her keen eyes missing nothing. In the emergency department, she observed 3 nurses prioritizing patients with better insurance. On the medical floor, she witnessed a resident berating a nursing assistant for a minor mistake while 3 patient monitors beeped unattended. When she gently asked a unit secretary about visitor policies, the young woman barely glanced up from her phone. "Brochures are by the elevator," she mumbled, immediately returning to her screen. As Sarah rounded a corner toward the surgical wing, she overheard a heated conversation in the doctor's lounge. Through the partially open door, she recognized Dr. Robert Winters, the acting chief of surgery, holding court with several attending physicians. "This diversity hire they're bringing in next week will be the death of Metropolitan's reputation," he declared, voice dripping with disdain. "20 years I've given to this institution, and the board chooses some obscure from community hospitals to lead our surgical department. I give her 6 months before she's running back to whatever clinic she came from." Murmurs of agreement followed, along with disparaging comments about checking boxes and lowering standards. Sarah's expression remained neutral, though she mentally noted each voice. When she followed a group of residents onto the surgical floor, a doctor finally acknowledged her presence with obvious irritation. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. Visitors aren't allowed beyond the waiting room." "I'm just observing," Sarah replied calmly. "I have an interest in surgical protocols." The resident's eyebrows shot up as he exchanged amused glances with his colleagues. When Sarah noticed him preparing to use an outdated technique for a central line placement, she spoke up, You might want to use ultrasound guidance for that. It reduces complications significantly. The resident looked at her as if she'd suggested performing surgery with stone tools. Unless you're a surgeon, which you clearly aren't, I suggest you mind your own business. His colleague snickered. Security can show you out if you're confused about where you belong. Sarah nodded politely and stepped back, making mental notes as she continued her observations. In that area, she watched nurses rush through safety checklists, sometimes completing forms without actually performing the required checks. Wealthier patients received lengthy explanations while others got cursory information delivered in medical jargon they couldn't possibly understand. Each interaction confirmed what the hospital's metrics had suggested. Metropolitan Memorial had become a place where appearance determined worth, where titles mattered more than gear, and where the vulnerable were rendered invisible. The overhead announcement cut through the hospital's controlled chaos. Code Blue, Room 10. Code Blue, Room 10. Sarah watched the sudden shift in energy as staff rushed toward the emergency. She followed at a measured pace, staying close enough to observe without interfering. Outside Room 10, a cluster of personnel had gathered, their voices overlapping in urgent confusion. Inside, a man lay on the gurney, his body rigid, skin flushing an alarming red as his temperature spiked dangerously. The anesthesiologist was frantically administering epinephrine while a nurse struggled to maintain an airway. Dr. Winters pushed through the door, immediately taking command. "What happened?" he demanded. Patient was fine during prep, then developed hives and respiratory distress immediately after induction, the anesthesiologist reported. "I'm treating for anaphylaxis, but he's not responding as expected." Sarah edged closer to the doorway, her experienced eye catching critical details others were missing. The unusual rigidity in the patient's jaw, the specific pattern of the temperature spike, the quality of the muscle contractions. "His temperature is exochar and climbing," a nurse called out. Dr. Winters barked orders for additional antihistamines and steroids, but Sarah could see the patient deteriorating rapidly. The cardiac monitor showed ominous rhythm changes as the team worked frantically. "It's not anaphylaxis," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. All heads turned briefly toward the doorway, then immediately back to the patient, dismissing the plainly dressed woman as irrelevant to the emergency. The patient's oxygen levels continued dropping as the wrong treatment protocol failed to address the true condition. Sarah stepped into the room, her demeanor transformed. "This is malignant hyperthermia, not anaphylaxis," she stated firmly. "You need immediately an ice packs. Now." Dr. Winters whipped around, face flushed with anger at the interruption. "And who exactly are you to give orders in my ear?" "Someone who recognizes malignant hyperthermia when I see it," Sarah replied calmly. "Your patient has the classic presentation, state following anesthetic, masseter spasm, rapidly climbing temperature, tachycardia. If you don't administer, in the next few minutes, he will die." The room froze in a moment of terrible indecision. Then a young resident broke the standoff, rushing to the medication cabinet. "We have in the MH kit," she said, already retrieving the emergency supplies. "Don't you dare," Dr. Winters growled. "I'm the senior physician here." But the monitor's alarming beep underscored the patient's worsening condition. The anesthesiologist made his choice, joining the resident. "I think she's right, Robert. This looks like MH." As the team began implementing the correct protocol, Dr. Winters turned his full fury toward Sarah. "I don't know who you think you are, but you have no authority in this hospital. Security will escort you out immediately." The doors to Room 10 flew open as James Harrigan, Metropolitan's chief administrator, rushed in, already speaking rapidly. "I came as soon as I heard about the Code Blue. Dr. Chen said we might have a malignant hyperthermia case in." He stopped abruptly, eyes widening in recognition. "Dr. Mitchell, we weren't expecting you until next week." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Dr. Winters' face froze in a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. "Dr. Mitchell," he repeated. "Sarah Mitchell." The administrator moved forward, hand extended. "Everyone, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our new chief of surgery." He turned to Sarah with a nervous smile. though it seems you've already introduced yourself in the most effective way possible. The previously dismissive staff now stood in stand silence as Sarah calmly moved to the patient's side, checking the administration and monitoring the vital signs that were already beginning to stabilize. The dose needs to be repeated every 5 to 10 minutes until the metabolic response decreases, she instructed, her focus entirely on the patient. Make sure the cooling continues, and let's get a central line for better monitoring. He'll need ICU care afterward. The team jumped to follow her directions, their earlier reluctance transformed into efficient compliance. Dr. Winters stood rigid, his face cycling through shock, embarrassment, and barely contained fury. The head nurse who had dismissed Sarah at the station earlier entered with additional supplies, then stopped short, recognition dawning on her face. Sarah met her eyes briefly, then returned her attention to the patient. We need continuous cardiac monitoring and electrolyte replacement, she continued. And someone should contact his family immediately. As the crisis stabilized, Sarah finally addressed the elephant in the room. Dr. Winters, I believe you and I have a meeting scheduled for next Monday. It seems we're getting acquainted a bit ahead of schedule. She extended her hand professionally. I look forward to working together to provide the best possible care for our patients. The forced handshake that followed would have chilled the operating room if not for the heat still radiating from the recovering patient. Dr. Winters' eyes conveyed a clear message: this wasn't over, even as he mumbled appropriate words of welcome. Once the patient was stabilized and transferred to intensive care, Sarah requested an immediate meeting in the main conference room. Word had spread through the hospital with lightning speed, and when she arrived, still in her simple cardigan and slacks, the room was filled with department heads, senior physicians, and nursing leadership. Dr. Winters sat rigidly at the table, his earlier bravado replaced by tightly controlled anger. The head nurse who had dismissed Sarah at the station stared fixedly at her notepad. Other staff members avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by ceiling tiles or the view from the windows. Sarah placed her worn briefcase on the table, surveying the assembled medical professionals with calm, steady eyes. When she spoke, her voice was measured but carried to every corner of the silent room. I'd like to thank you all for accommodating this unplanned meeting. As most of you have now heard, I am Dr. Sarah Mitchell, your new chief of surgery. She paused briefly. Today was not how I planned to introduce myself, but it has been uniquely informative. She moved around the table slowly, making brief eye contact with each person present. I've spent the day observing how Metropolitan operates when no one thinks administration is watching. Some of what I saw was concerning. Some was frankly alarming. A few uncomfortable shifts in seats punctuated the silence. I observed elderly patients whose call buttons were ignored. I saw families left without interpreters or updates. I watched as staff prioritized patients based on their appearance rather than their medical needs. Her eyes moved deliberately to specific faces as she spoke. I witnessed rude interactions, rushed safety checks, and a moment when a patient nearly died because expertise was dismissed based on the speaker's appearance. Dr. Winters cleared his throat to interrupt, but Sarah continued smoothly. I am not here to single out individuals today. That's not productive. What I am here to address is the culture that allows these behaviors to flourish. She opened her briefcase and removed a folder. Metropolitan's patient outcomes have been declining for 3 years. Staff turnover has increased by 47%. These aren't coincidences. She closed the folder and looked directly at the assembled leadership team. At Metropolitan, we will create a culture where everyone is treated with dignity: patients, visitors, and yes, even plainly dressed women asking questions at the nurse's station. Excellence in medicine isn't just about technical skill or prestigious credentials. It's about seeing people truly seeing them, and delivering care with both competence and compassion. The silence in the room had transformed from defensive to attentive. Tomorrow, I'll begin individual meetings with each department. Tonight, I want everyone to reflect on the kind of institution we want Metropolitan to be. Not just in our brochures or on our website, but in those critical moments when a vulnerable human being places their life in our hands. She gathered her materials with deliberate calm. That's all for today. Thank you for your time. As chairs scraped and the room began to empty, Sarah noticed something subtle but significant. Several staff members were looking at her directly now, with expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious respect. The weeks that followed brought substantial changes to Metropolitan Memorial. Sarah's office door remained consistently open, a symbolic departure from her predecessor's policy. She instituted morning rounds where every patient's concerns were heard regardless of their insurance status or personal background. Staff who embraced the new approach found themselves mentored and promoted. Those who resisted discovered that Sarah's gentle demeanor concealed an unwavering resolve. She continued her practice of occasionally wearing simple clothes while making unannounced visits to different departments, observing genuine interactions rather than the performances put on for scheduled leadership rounds. Word spread quickly, however, and staff began recognizing her regardless of her attire, not just because she was the chief of surgery, but because she took time to learn their names, acknowledge their contributions, and treated everyone from janitors to senior physicians with the same respectful attention. Dr. Winters remained coldly professional in their interactions, making his resentment clear in subtle ways. He challenged her decisions in meetings, questioned her judgment on administrative matters, and maintained a circle of physicians who resisted the cultural shift. That changed unexpectedly during a complex cardiac procedure when their most advanced equipment failed. Sarah stepped in seamlessly, demonstrating an innovative technique she'd developed in a hospital years earlier. Her hands moved with extraordinary precision. Her voice remained steady through the crisis, and she guided the team through the procedure with masterful competence. "I've never seen anything like that," Dr. Winters admitted afterward, his typical arrogance momentarily suspended. "Where did you learn that approach?" "County General, during a power outage," Sarah replied. Sometimes limitations foster the best innovations. Something shifted between them that day, not friendship, but a grudging professional respect that gradually extended to other aspects of their working relationship. The head nurse who had dismissed Sarah on that first day became, surprisingly, one of her strongest allies. Marie Collins had worked at Metropolitan for years and seen countless leadership changes, most bringing grandiose promises that evaporated within months. "You're the real deal," Marie told Sarah bluntly during their third week of working together. "Most administrators talk about patient care while staring at spreadsheets. You actually see the people behind the metrics." Together, they implemented practical changes, interpreters available on every floor, redesigned workflows that prioritized patient needs over paperwork, regular sessions where staff could voice concerns without fear of retribution. Within 3 months, patient satisfaction scores began climbing for the first time in years. One memorable moment came when Sarah overheard an imperious surgeon dismissing a woman who was asking detailed questions about hospital equipment. Sarah quietly approached and introduced the visitor as Elena Gonzalez, whose foundation had just donated $3 million for new pediatric technology. The surgeon's face underwent a transformation remarkably similar to what Sarah had witnessed on her first day. "Appearances can be misleading, Dr. Peterson," she noted with gentle emphasis. "Something worth remembering with patients as well as visitors." 6 months after her unconventional first day, Sarah sat in her office reviewing the latest patient outcome data. The improvements were undeniable. Infection rates down at 30%, patient satisfaction scores up by 40%, staff retention stabilizing for the first time in years. The hospital board had extended her contract with enthusiastic support, and medical journals were beginning to take notice of Metropolitan's remarkable turnaround. From her window, Sarah spotted a young woman approaching the hospital entrance. She wore simple jeans and a plain sweater, carried a modest backpack instead of an expensive briefcase, and moved with the slight hesitancy of someone in unfamiliar surroundings. Dr. Alicia Patel, their newest surgical fellow, starting her first day. Sarah watched as Alicia approached the same nurse's station where her own journey at Metropolitan had begun. The difference in reception couldn't have been more striking. Marie Collins greeted the young doctor warmly, personally introducing her to the staff on duty. A resident offered to show her around, and Dr. Winters, who happened to be passing by, stopped to welcome her to the team. Later that afternoon, during the monthly department meeting, Sarah listened as Dr. Winters presented the latest surgical outcomes to the assembled staff. Our complication rates are now well below the national average, he noted, displaying a graph with a sharply declining line. And I think we all know the primary reason. He turned toward Sarah with a nod that contained genuine respect. Dr. Mitchell has proven to be the finest surgeon and leader I've ever worked with. Her emphasis on seeing the whole patient, not just the pathology, has transformed our approach. Coming from the man who had once dismissed her as a diversity hire, the acknowledgement carried particular weight. The room erupted in applause that Sarah accepted with a modest smile before redirecting the conversation to upcoming challenges. That evening, as she addressed Metropolitan's annual fundraising gala, Sarah stood at the podium in a simple but elegant suit, her chief of surgery lab coat draped over her shoulders. The audience, wealthy donors, board members, and community leaders, listened attentively as she shared the hospital's vision. At Metropolitan, we believe excellence in medicine begins with seeing people clearly, recognizing their dignity, their struggles, their courage. When we truly see each other, we create an environment where healing flourishes. She glanced around the transformed institution that had once judged her by her cardigan and comfortable shoes. In the back of the room stood the patient whose life she'd saved on that first day, now fully recovered and volunteering in the hospital's patient advocacy program. True quality in healthcare isn't measured by the marble in our lobbies or the technology in our operating rooms, though we certainly appreciate both. She continued with a warm smile toward the donors. It's measured by how we treat every person who walks through our doors, regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstances. As she concluded her remarks to enthusiastic applause, Sarah recognized that Metropolitan's transformation mirrored what she had always believed about medicine itself. That beneath the superficial trappings of prestige and status, the heart of healing lay in human connection, in the willingness to look beyond appearances and truly see the person standing before you, whether a patient in distress, a colleague with valuable insights, or a plainly dressed woman waiting patiently at a nurse's station, ready to make a difference.